Hello, welcome to Hello Hemlock, where we will be continuing our discussion of Tomson Highway's Kiss of the Fur Queen. So we were very lucky to have Emily with us this month on Hello Hemlock, and she selected Kiss of the Fur Queen, which is the debut novel of pianist and playwright Tomson Highway. So Emily is extraordinary when she's talking about books, and in the first video that she did for Hello Hemlock, the first video of this Kiss of the Fur Queen series, she demonstrates remarkable close reading skills, and I got so much out of watching her first video. It's fantastic. And if you haven't checked out her videos on her own channel, I really recommend you do so. The editing that she does for the Hello Hemlock video is what she does in all of her videos. She is just so good. So good. So go send her some love. So Emily spent her time in her first video giving us a really great introduction to the text, and then also, there's a barking dog, and also she spent her time talking about music. I'd like to spend my time in this video just building a little bit of context around residential schools. I'm not by any means an expert, but I thought I would just do a little introduction because I think that having that background when reading this novel, obviously it comes in handy. It is, it's a very important part of the history and the context surrounding the narrative. So interestingly, Kiss of the Fur Queen went through a few incarnations before becoming the novel that it is today. So according to Sam McKegney, who traced a lot of Tomson Highway's interviews throughout the 90s, Kiss of the Fur Queen started out as an autobiography and then turned into a stage play and then a made-for-TV movie and then an 800-page novel before becoming the novel that it is as we read it. So, like Emily says in her video, the story is about two brothers who are flown at a young age out of their community in northern Manitoba into a residential school that's operated by the Roman Catholic Church, and then it goes on to chart their lives into adulthood. And considering how it began as an autobiography, Kiss of the Fur Queen, the novel retains a lot of those autobiographical elements. There are a lot of parallels between the brothers in the novel and then Tomson Highway and his brother Rene. Both Highway brothers did attend residential schools and then ended up navigating their lives through their art. Tomson Highway emerged as a talented pianist, just like Jeremiah, and Gabriel in the novel became a celebrated dancer who died of AIDS-related causes, just like Rene Highway did. So like I said before, having a familiarity with the history of residential schools is very beneficial when reading this novel. Between 1879 and 1986, the Canadian government removed children from their homes forcibly and moved them into these residential schools that were run by the Roman Catholic Church. So what this meant was forced separation from their families, forcing them to speak non-native languages and punishing them if they did not, and also feeding them this kind of propaganda that colored indigenous cultures as being savage. Native cultures and spiritual practices were demonized so that in order to ease assimilation. And of course, what this really did, and which was likely one of the plans all along, was it alienated people from their original culture and their families. And when these people finally were able to leave residential schools, often they were unable to locate themselves within either culture. Not only were they alienated from their indigenous cultures, literally having it like beaten out of them, but when they did emerge out of residential schools, they were barred entry to the kind of like Western communities that by the definition of residential schools they were being groomed to be part of, to be assimilated into. Inferior education, institutionalized racism, and an overall alienation from their native cultures resulted in these lasting imprints on survivors of residential schools. Things like depression and crises of identity, alcoholism and other substance abuse, poverty, homelessness, suicide, all of these things can be kind of traced back to the residential school system because it really is a divide that separates people from the right to be who they are, or to have any sort of like identity. However, Highway has said in a number of interviews that his residential school experience was not altogether negative, and in fact he says it was a positive experience for him because it gave him access to things that he would have otherwise not been able to touch. He was given the opportunity to learn languages, and he was also, given the gift of like music literacy. He was able to learn music. He was able to have access to a piano, and had he stayed in his northern Manitoba community, he may not have had access to that. Sam McKeagney notes that this kind of like not quite negative, not quite positive outlook comes through in Kiss of the Fur Queen. Highway refuses in the novel to be constrained by a fact-based historiographic relationship to residential school experience. His writing acquiesces neither to the colonial storyline of inevitable assimilation crafted through residential school institutionalization, nor the post-colonial storyline of inevitable victimhood crafted through revisionist history. And Emily made an interesting point that I wanted to talk about when she was talking about language in her first video. She talks about the use of Cree language in some parts of the novel, and as a non-Cree reader, the inability to really understand or to properly translate those moments of the text. And so, as a non-Cree reader, I know I am faced with the inability to properly understand or fully understand those moments and those experiences of those characters. So she talks about these acts of mistranslation that might happen within the novel, which made me think of the ways that maybe we're taught to read. As a white, middle to upper class North American male, I think about the ways that I have been taught to read, and then the language that surrounds that. Words like relate or identify. Very often I hear these words, used in conversations when people are talking about liking or disliking a book. Saying like, oh, I related to her, or I didn't identify with these characters. As though what makes a book important or good or productive is whether or not you can relate or insert yourself into that novel or into that character. And I think that way of thinking is kind of pervasive in the way that we read a lot of situations, not just read novels, but maybe read political issues, like relationships with others. I think that, we do very often look for connections and similarities, but I think that maybe sometimes we do that to the detriment of like acknowledging difference in like a comfortable way. And so I think, like Emily suggests, so like the impossibility of really knowing or identifying can be very productive. I think that texts that challenge this way of thinking are very beneficial. Not everyone comes from the place that I do, right? Like not everyone is a white male, middle to upper class reader, but like we can kind of assume that the Canadian readership is very often like that white middle to upper class Anglophone reader. It's like the kind of like place of privilege that we come to think about books from, I think, a lot of the time. So there are so many excluded voices. And I think that in the discourse of a lot of Aboriginal concerns, that's like that kind of privilege really drowns out the voices that need to be heard. So I think that like the inability to understand like what Emily is saying, the inability to translate everything and understand everything kind of might help us to be okay with difference. As Wab Canoe says, he's a public intellectual and also boyfriend of Ronnie and myself. He said during his 2014 Canada Reads, one of his segments, that reconciliation cannot be another attempt at assimilation. And he talks about how people coming from a Western perspective are happy to acknowledge the differences of other people, or like align themselves with the interests of, say, Aboriginal communities and Aboriginal interests, as long as they align with a Western perspective. But I think that acknowledging difference is something that isn't threatening or isn't dangerous, and acknowledging that there are things that we cannot understand. By understanding that we can't always understand, and by being unsettled by the things that we can't understand, rather than forcing those things to change for us, just accepting them and saying, you know, the place I'm coming from is different from the place you're coming from, without saying, y'all need to change to be like me or to see things the way I see things. That's when we can begin to like move forward and make changes. I realize now that I am close to being done filming that I actually didn't talk a lot about what happens in the book, and this is basically all context. So I hope that you go check out Emily's video, and she does a ton of close reading into the novel. And I'm certain that Jess will do the same. But I just wanted to kind of give, first of all, like, you know, a little overview about residential schooling, and then also talk a little bit about what Emily said about mistranslations in terms of language, and then I took that to another place. In the springtime, Tomson Highway visited the University of Alberta to deliver the 2014 Canadian Literature Centre Henry Kreisel Memorial Lecture. And so, we have a few videos up on the CLC's YouTube channel, so if you want to hear Tomson Highway giving parts of his lecture, I'll link that below, and we're going to have the full audio recording up on the website soon, so you can look forward to that if that's something that interests you. And otherwise, I can't wait to see what Jess has to say about this novel. I hope you liked this discussion that sort of ties into the novel, but isn't explicitly like close reading of the text or anything. And I want to thank Emily for joining us. You have really raised the bar for Hello Hemlock. What you've done in your video is remarkable. And yeah, look forward to more from Emily. And in case you don't already know, we at Hello Hemlock have launched a website. So if you visit hellohemlock.ca, you can see that. And what we have planned for that is a collection of a lot of writing about CanLit, and we have talked to tons of our friends from all over the world about contributing, and we have some amazing stuff lined up. So make sure you visit that and check back often, because I'm really looking forward to sharing all that with you. Okay, I'm off. See you next month. Bye.
The story begins in northern Manitoba on Mystic Lake, in the hunt of snow and of caribou, and we meet two brothers there, Champion and Onimitu, as they're known in that environment. And as the story progresses, we follow the two brothers as they move first from northern Manitoba to the residential schools set up by the Roman Catholic Church, and then to Winnipeg, and ultimately to kind of the southernmost metropolis of Canada.